Hey everyone, welcome to our presentation. I'm Josh Knox. I'm a functional consultant at Dynamic Consulting.
And I'm Joel Leichty. I am the Power Practice Manager at Dynamic Consulting.
And we're really excited to be here today. Thank you everyone in the DynamicsCon community for letting us be a part of this. Thank you for all the DynamicsCon sponsors for coming together and helping make this event a success.
Josh, aren't you? Wait. You're forgetting something very important. Aren't you supposed to sing this title? Like custom, no code, workflows. Excellent.
Custom, no code, workflows, and excellent.
Yes.
Something like that.
Exactly. I think we're too old,
we did it.
And this is going to go over everyone's head.
Here's hoping there will be other old people watching this too. I guarantee my parents will be watching this. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad.
And yeah,
will you invite your parents, Joel?
No. I don't know if they're going to show up to this one.
All right.
But feel free to hit us up in the chat.
We'll
be live chatting throughout, or you can ask us an easy question for the end.
So for this demonstration, basically, Joel, I came to you. I had a problem, right? I've got lots of problems, but this was just the finance and operations problem that I happen to have, right? It's a common scenario, but sometimes you have your finance and operations accounting system. It's your great big ERP, and you want to get data into your ERP. It could be any sort of data, but a business might have lots of users, some who might not be authorized to put data into that ERP. Some might not be qualified to put data into that ERP. Some might just not want to be touching the system at all, right? So this is a common scenario that I hear about a lot as I talk to people that use finance and operations, and they say, "Oh, this is so big, so hard. I don't want to. I have lots of people. I don't want them to touch it at all. So how can we get that data in, right?
Yeah,
that's sort of the big question, right, Joel?
And I'll just add that we literally have this problem at Dynamic Consulting, but I haven't fixed it yet. There's too many steps to get new customers created and controlled and workflowed and et cetera, et cetera. And
like physician heal thyself, right?
And in this case, the process is, I just have to do it myself, which is not acceptable. It needs to be
distributed, right?
Yes.
But what happens in every company, right? When we don't have a process to get this in, and the people that need to get the stuff in can't get it in, they just wind up sending an email, right, to whoever that person is and says, "Hey, can you do this thing for me? Send this stuff."
Right. Or you have to
that's
fill
how
out.
Every business solves the problem.
You have to fill out a PDF form and save it, and then you send it to somebody, and then they take that form and they just type it in manually to another system. It's a little bit, antiquated sometimes.
Yeah, and so the problems that we have are we have duplicate entry problems. We have sometimes not all the necessary data is sent over, right? So you say, oh well, you need to always send me, let's say this piece of data, and so people just start sending you bad data because they're saying, oh, I couldn't have left the field blank, so I had to put something. I put none. Is that good enough? Right. These are just problems that come up when you don't have a structured process around getting data into your ERP system.
Exactly.
So that's sort of the big question, right? And what does everyone say when you say, oh, we don't have this? What do we need to do? Create a workflow, right? If only there was a way that we could just have some workflow and swoosh it in there, right?
Yeah, just only show people really what they have to do and don't, especially when you look at F&O, there's so many fields. And it's just gets, it can be very complicated if you're a simpleton like me and you just need the basics. And
So it'd be great if we could give people some sort of a simple interface to get the data in, and then figure out a way to make that flow into finance and operations. That's sort of what we were looking at. That's the big problem that we were trying to attack as we started to think about this, right, Joel? And it was
yes, and I was going to say, most importantly, you probably have like an accountant or somebody on the right side, and if there's anybody's life we need to make easier, it's the the back office people who have to deal with, they have to deal with the poo emoji flowing through to them, basically. So we want to make their life easier, and make it like the Simpsons bird.
And I support that. Let's make things easier for the back office. Everyone in the chat, if you could just give a shout out to the people in the back office in our attempts to make life easier for them, please just let's get that love going. Let's hear it for the people in the back office.
Why don't you order flowers for the back office, or send them a card,
or give them a flow so they don't have to deal with your simple data?
We'll wait.
We'll just pause here. If you're watching this on YouTube in a month or two, just pause right now, send a nice thank you card, and then come back, press play. All right. How do we do it? And that was the part of this that was exciting for me. I think there's lots of ways that we can go about doing this, but it's a discovery process. And like you said, Joel, it's something that we don't even have solved at our company internally. And so obviously there's lots of room to experiment, see what works and what doesn't work. And I think we did that. I think we found a lot of things that didn't work. And so that was a success. Let's get into some demos. So we structured this. You can see the Uber ratings at the top, basically going from simplest to 5 stars, being more complex. And the first challenge that we had was just, how do we get data into finance and operations, right? What would be the simplest way that I can, at an intro level, build something, right? You do some process to just get data into F&O where I don't have to touch or log into F&O. The data will come in. So that was the first thing that we started working on, right, Joel?
Yeah, and you can see kind of the Power Automate we're going to demo here is pretty simple. It's just, let's trigger a flow and have data go into F&O. It's that simple, just sort of getting started with getting data into F&O. So let's look at, I'm going to open this up, and I'm just going to, so I have a flow here. It's my level 1 flow. So to start with, I'm just going to kind of skip to the end. So I'm going to click run this flow, and I click run flow. I click done. And if everything went well, there we go. Succeeded in 6 seconds. It's the fastest demo ever. So if we jump over to F&O, and I hit refresh, now we're going to see, I can prove it with my timestamp. This literally just went in. Our level 1 test successfully went into F&O. Yeah, so a bunch of junk because it's my first flow. So we made it as simple as possible. So a couple things, and I'm actually going to walk through creating this one from scratch. But one of the easiest ways to trigger a flow is just to put this first thing that says "do it manually," which is basically click a button and something happens. And then there's this other flow step, which is creating a record in F&O. So this uses the data entities from F&O. So we used customers v3. We put it into this test environment. And then basically we just typed in the required fields and hard coded most of the required fields. So currency, customer group, company, customer account, and under advanced options here, you would find organization name. So those are like the 6 fields you have to create a customer. And that's all we put in here. And then this customer account, this is just kind of a way to make the customer account unique. So we didn't have to deal with it. That's why the customer number is so goofy. We'll talk about that later on.
It's great. I mean, what we've done, right, is we've replaced the new customer button in F&O with running this flow. And if you want to do some other customer, you would just have to change the parameters of your flow, rerun your flow. It's kind of like a Rune Goldberg machine to do something very simple, right? But we've done this. This is just sort of, this was more, it was enlightening to me because I'd never built a flow before, and it was neat for you to show me it's just that easy.
So let me just go through a couple things that are key here. So when you create a new flow, probably the most common one you'll end up using is automated cloud flow, which is like you basically trigger when something happens, then, you know, make something else happen, right? So when I add a record in my Power App, then, you know, insert that record into F&O. So we'll show that later on. But if you're just getting started and you're trying to create the simplest thing possible, the instant cloud flow is the easiest way to go. So you can just say manually trigger a flow and create a new step. And then the other key part of this is fin and ops. So fin and ops, that's F&O. And you can see that you could do a lot of things. You could do updates. You can retrieve records from F&O, like a list of records. You can do deletions. So we just did the creation. And then you simply, you know, select your environment, select the entity that you want to get into. So I'm going to do a different entity for fun. And yeah, then you, like, just to get started, you just put in the required fields. So that's it. And
really
then
cool.
You can click test. There's a run button. There's a test button, a couple ways to fire this off. So we're not going to make this Power Automate training, but did want to kind of just say, like, I think the point of this is for level 1, you can get data into F&O pretty easy. And this is a great way to practice, like, getting started to, you know, push data into a test environment.
It makes working with flows really accessible.
Right.
All right. So the next thing that we had was, you know, we've sort of proved out this idea that we can get data into F&O. Right. The other constraint we have is sort of on the other side, right? How do you deal with getting people to give you data in a way that's structured? And right. So one way that businesses deal with, well, let's get me data, is they have some sort of a form, right? Like you said, we have a PDF or an email, right? That can get sent to somebody. That is a structured way of getting data. To get more advanced than that is, you know, if you gave someone precise fields that they could enter data into or precise selectable values, that helps sort of filter and validate the data, provide better data to the back office people. And that's a better scenario, right? And we have different tools that enable you to do that, right, Joel? We could, forms is something you could build in to create that. You could use SharePoint or SharePoint lists and give people access to those SharePoint lists and have them write records there. And the way that you showed me how we can get through this is by using Power Apps, right? And so we looked at different ways that you could use Power Apps. And so could you bring up the next slide, Joel, and where did we actually land in terms of how to use Power Apps?
Yeah, I mean, we chose Power Apps because as we get to some of the more advanced scenarios in here, I think Power Apps work best. One of the things about, one of the complexities of F&O is a lot of people who are kicking off the customer entry process, they may not know what legal entity the customer goes into. They may not know, you know, what a customer group is. And some of the other required fields that may not be good at, like checking for duplicates, for example. So that's like all the things that somebody else has to do, but they do, you know, it's a lot of times maybe it's like a salesperson or something who, you know, they do know about the customer and who they are and where they are and some of the stats about the customer. So that's the information they're trying to pass along.
Mm-hmm. And when I look at this screen here, right, we have sort of Canvas apps and model-driven Power Apps. And how did you decide this looks like a model-driven Power App? Is that right?
Yeah. So this is a model-driven app, which it's similar level of effort getting started as like building SharePoint. So it's pretty accessible. It's a little harder, but it's similar in terms of skill level. And I think model-driven apps are easier to get started than Canvas apps. Canvas apps are just, you kind of get a blank slate and you have to figure it out from there. Model-driven apps are more like, okay, I'm creating a table and I'm creating a form, and it's all there's like steps to the process of getting started with this.
Okay, so could you demo the app and let's see, what does it look like to create a new customer in this app that you built?
Yeah, so basically I've got this pending customers form, and let me just refresh this because I think I made some last minute demo updates to make it look prettier. So I've basically created this app called DynamicsCon, and I've got my pending customer form. And so, the person at the beginning of the process is going to hit new. They're going to go in, DynamicsCon from the chat.
Let's hear from the chat. What questions do you have?
So I've made this so that's the only, two pieces of information that the person has to give me to get started is this customer name and what's their website, and they hit save.
Ta-da! You got that data stored sort of in a data model now. Is that right? Or it's structured as opposed to being an email that might have any number of pieces of data.
Yep.
Can we take a look at how this is built a little bit more?
Yes.
Show me kind of on the back end. What does that look like?
Anything for you, Josh. So so I'm going to a website, and I'm going to go here from scratch just to navigate there. So it's make.powerapps.com. Picking the environment is important. So I'm going to pick the environment that I'm using. And with F&O environments these days, you actually get one of these Power Apps environments with your F&O environment. So there's like a specific place that makes the most sense to build these things. And then I'm going to jump down to solutions, and I've created a new solution called DynamicsCon. So this is kind of where all your stuff is held. But this is where you would create a table, which is the fields you want and the form definitions. And you can create an app, which is basically just a page of different tables that you can put in one spot. You can create a sitemap, which is the menu structure. And that's pretty much it. You do have to create security at some point to give access to this, the tables you want to give access to. But you basically create those things in your solution, you publish them, and you're off and running.
Cool.
How much in the weeds do you want me to go on the solution?
Let's just look into the table a bit. And I think you had to build some views on the table.
Yeah. So
what?
I could show a few things there. So when you create a table, it'll give you some fields by default, and then you can just add columns. This add columns, that's where it's very much like SharePoint. Very similar. You pick the type of column and is it required? Are there default values and those kind of things? Views, these are like the grid pages that you initially go into, and it comes with a couple of standard views, and you can edit one. Usually the most common one you'd edit is the active customers, in this case, or active whatever your table is. And then the forms is like the the card that pulls up with all the fields. So that's where you kind of organize into tabs and columns and put your fields on the page wherever you want them. So columns, views, forms, that's basically all you have to know to get started with making your own Power App.
So when we look into the app that you built, you have this pending customers, the columns that you see there. If you could just flip to that.
You want me to go to the app?
Yeah, just go back one slide from here, or one.
Yeah.
Right now, you're looking at a card right now. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So this is like the main form card, and then this would be a view.
This would be a view of the table you created.
Exactly.
Is that right? And you basically drag that view into your site or into your beautiful canvas. Basically, so you have a view here, and then your view links to cards that you create. That's sort of what I'm seeing in the nuts and bolts of it.
Yep.
Cool. So that's our model-based app that we built.
And one of the things I like is I find that the Power Apps are very, powerful. Yeah. But they're also, I find them to be easy to use. That's one of the powers. I don't know, the way the layout is and the buttons and everything. It's just, I find it pretty straightforward.
So then the question becomes, right, we've built this place to store the data, right? We've proved that we can get any data into F&O, not any data, but this hard-coded data. Now we want to take the data that we're creating in our model-driven app. As you create a new customer there, we want to see that flow into F&O, right? That was the next thing that we took on, is importing this simple data into F&O and then have an email kickoff to say that the data was imported.
Yeah, and it's basically, so this is, kind of a little bit above level 1 because we're trying to consume something that we entered and put that value into F&O. So that's basically the concept of this step. Yeah, there's two key things I'm going to show. One is like how to get that value, into F&O automatically. And I'll talk a little bit about, kind of sending an email or some kind of notification at the end.
Okay.
So I'm going to flip over to F&O. There we go. Let's hear it from the chat. It is already here in this case. So you'll notice I didn't push any buttons. I didn't touch anything, Josh, I swear.
No edits.
I just thought of this customer name live. So, it just came in. And then I'll also show, kind of the second half of this demo, I received an email notification. Flip over to email, and here we go. DynamicsCon, let's hear it from the chat, was added to D365 F&O. Gave me some details about what got added. And then in this case, I also got a couple links. And one of the things I really like about Power App that I'll show here is the fact that I can add links that take me right back into the record that I just created. So I can click on this link for my email. It's going to open up my Power App. It's going to open up pending customers, and it's going to open up the record that I just created. Yeah. Really cool.
That's cool. Can we get some applause in the chat?
Yeah. So it's like, it is, unfortunately, you can't do it in a simple way in F&O. I don't want to get yelled at by the developers, but you can't, the way you do this in Power Apps is super easy. So yeah, that's it for, for the, kind of the workflow there. We entered something into a Power App, and it showed up in F&O, and it sent us an email confirming that it went in there.
Yeah. And so this flow that you created, how is this flow different than the flow that we looked at the first time?
So
So the first one was triggered by just you hit run and that makes it go. What makes this go, or how does that work?
right. So this flow is this trigger is based on a Dataverse trigger. So it's like anytime something happens in, okay, Dataverse, I just threw out a random word, didn't I?
What's that? We haven't said that
Dataverse. So anytime I do something, and it can be SharePoint, it can be Power Apps, it can be kind of anything in the Microsoft ecosystem, it can create this basically a trigger to fire off in Power Automate. Mm-hmm. So that's the idea. And, once that happens, I've used a value, right? So we got the customer name. Sorry, I'm going to jump to another, the edit screen. It's easier to read this. So we've got pending customer. We've got the customer name that we've consumed in this step. So it's hard to see here. I have to scroll down, but I promise it's in here somewhere. There's so many fields. Why did we pick the longest entity? So you can see here this little Dataverse icon. So I've consumed the customer name, in my next step. So that's how that was automated. And then again, in this other step, I've consumed some of the other fields that I created into email step as well. And that's how I got this deep link. There was a way that I could just insert the record ID from my table into this step.
Mm-hmm. So, that's great, right? But if this is, we automated the flow of things into our F&O environment. You have this problem, right? What if we automate garbage going into our F&O environment? That doesn't seem like it makes us any better off.
Our accountant is still unhappy.
I don't want our accountants to be unhappy. I want our back office people to feel supported and loved. Can we pause right now so I can write a thank you letter, actually? Dear Lauren. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so we can insert, tell us about a workflow.
So the next scenario that we have here is we want to validate the data as it gets input. And so we have data going into our Power App and then some sort of approval process on the data that's getting put there in the Power App. So that's the next progression in what we're trying to do, right, Joel?
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm going to show that through basically an email step. So there's a special kind of flow step where you can do an approval email. And then once it approves, I'm going to take the response that I gave in my email and send it back to the record. So let me just jump into Outlook. And here I've got another email. So I've got my, let's hear it from the chat email and some information. I don't have it in here, but I could put another deep link if I wanted to look at the record. But basically the key part in here is I can register a response right from my email. That's it. One step. Yes, this is good. And then if I flip back to my record, so many tabs.
So many tabs.
Flip back to my record. I just updated this via email to this status.
That's cool.
I agree. And so basically, I'll just show a couple key parts about the steps here. So one of the steps was this like email where you can select what options the user is allowed to pick. And then based on what option they picked, so I have the option they chose, then I'm doing different things with the data. So I chose approved, and therefore I'm going down this approval path. So if you reject it, you could send an email back to the person who submitted it and say, hey, I rejected it. Sorry. It's not going to happen.
Something else. Let's see. I think we're a bit short on time, so I think that's a neat step, right? That we're getting data into our app, we're approving the data, and then this level 4 is how do we take that approved data and then put that into F&O, right? We're sort of tying together this end-to-end process. We don't want every record put into F&O. We just want the approved records to be put into F&O, right? That was the next challenge that we had.
Exactly. And I'm not going to show it going into F&O. I think I've proven that we can get data into F&O. But there is kind of a technical.
I trust you.
I don't know about that. There's kind of a technical key in here that I did want to point out. So one of the cool things you can do in Power Automate, in the settings for this, there's kind of this weird code that you have to put in. Yeah, but you can basically put, this is a condition that I'm putting on that says only run this if the status got updated to approved. So I don't just, if the status got updated to rejected, I don't want this to run because then it's rejected. So I can have the flow only kick off if a certain condition is true. So very useful to know this trigger conditions thing, and this is the perfect scenario for it.
Is there a really good blog or something that explains how to use those trigger conditions, or who's the best resource on that?
There is you have to Google it. If we have time in the Q&A, okay. I'll demo a hack for getting that trigger condition in, but I'm going to keep it rolling for now.
Let's keep going. So putting it all together, now you can go crazy, right? We've got that basic scenario is done, and I know, Joel, you really went wild on what can we do from here, right? So that's where this goes, right? Is as a business, it's a simple flow, but you could have multiple parts, multiple people, and it's layering on things to what we've done so far, right?
Yeah, and I'll show another way that you can kind of kick these off. But the idea here is there may be multiple people in the process. So I may need my credit and collections department. I may need my warehousing department. I may need my accounting department to all sort of weigh in on different aspects of setting up this record. We've used customer as our common example, but, items might be another good example where different people like finance understands item groups, but my warehouse manager understands, the warehouse settings and my purchasing manager understands master planning settings, et cetera, right? So a lot of these cases, many people have to get involved, and I can sort of use this to orchestrate the process. So I'm going to orchestrate this workflow as sort of, maybe I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm the manager of getting customers into the system. So I'm going to sort of tell people when I need their information. So for example, maybe before I can do anything with a customer, I have to have my credit department, check and make sure they're credit worthy, as an example. So my credit worthy. So one of the ways I can do this is through, you can actually generate a flow. This is kind of like a button flow, but I have the context of my record sort of available in this kind of flow. So, so you can see I've set up a couple. So my first one is going to be to do a credit limit request. And for this particular flow, it's going to come up and tell me to run. Again, this is like a button flow, but has the context of the record I just entered. You can see I got a message from Teams. So I'm going to go in here and I'm actually using the Power Automate bot, which sometimes you see this in a demo and you're like, yeah, whatever. But I think these adaptive cards in Teams are really cool, because an adaptive card is a way to like send somebody a mini form, right? So I've sent somebody a form via Teams and I'm like, hey, fill this out right now. And so, okay, well, I'm going to give you 50,000 and I'm going to give you an A. I've got my deep link button in here so they could jump right back into, that pending customer record if they wanted to, or they can submit those credit ratings back to the record. So I submitted, it went back to the record, and if I've waited long enough and I refresh this, we should see it here on the credit tab. Yep, there we go. Got filled in. So I sent somebody a mini form, not the big form, so that I could get an answer right away. And then when they responded to that answer, brought it back into my Power App record.
That's really neat.
And so, you can kind of think of that from an orchestration perspective. I could do that to many people, but I really like those adaptive cards in Teams. They're a cool way to do this. And then the other one that I did in here, of course, we're sending stuff to F&O. So I could, if I was going to like review all this in my Power App and I only want it to be sent over to F&O when I'm comfortable with it, I could I could do a flow that basically, generates it in F&O. So that was my other kind of...
Which brings it full circle to sort of our trigger-based flow, right?
Yes. Our trigger one was automatic. This one is a way to get it over manually, but it's still kind of following the same process.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into the weeds of those things, but I think the key things there are you kind of create it from your Power App. So there's actually a button in here for creating your flow from here is one way to do it, I should say. You can do it in Power Automate, but this is a very simple way to do it. And then the other thing I did with Teams is called adaptive cards. And again, we're short on time, but if the Q&A has more questions about adaptive cards, ask and I'll kind of show how you author those.
So, in summary, what did we learn, Joel?
What?
I guess we've got three.
We learned that emojis are
ideas
easier than typing things out.
Yeah. If you want to take a moment in the chat and try and interpret these emojis, go ahead. Just try and tell us what you think we think you learned. That would be. You are shaking like crazy. Is there an earthquake over there, Joel?
It's me laughing.
Well, here's what we thought that you thought we would think you would learn. Basically, we can use these flows to stop bad data getting emailed. We don't want that. Flows in Power Automate and using these apps or other things are a way that we can cut down on those bad data emails, and that good flows lead to happy, which is probably just more a summation of the emojis than an actual idea. But if some of this stuff works, if it works well, if it's designed well, it's going to be a lot better for everybody in the back office. And the third idea is just don't get frustrated. There's a lot to learn here, right? It's easy to show it in this polished demo, but there's a lot of sweat, tears. I even heard there was some blood involved in terms of just getting all these these different flows created. There's a lot to learn. It's a lot to wrap your head around, right? We've spent all this time on this together, Joel. I still only feel like I have a really limited beginner's understanding, except you get the vision of everything that it could be. And so there's a learning curve, and don't let that get you down.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. And it kind of leads me into the final point that I wanted to make, which is all the lies I told in my demo. I don't want to go through my lies in detail, but I just want to say, I've done this a good amount, and there's a lot of Googling for me. So that's a lot of the reason that, from a presentation perspective, we wanted to start simple and sort of add things on as we go. Like that's literally the best way to make these things, is just to do one step at a time, test the step, go to the next step, go on, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's, it's just,
that's a great statement. And it's hard. One, it's hard, but two, there's just really what I find is there's a really amazing community around Power Apps. Everybody working in sort of the Power Platform stuff seems to be a lot of fun. They're willing to share their knowledge, and it sort of just ties back to DynamicsCon and the DynamicsCon community. It's really great to have a lot of people that are interested in learning how to use these tool best together, right?
I totally agree. So, and I appreciate everyone coming today, interacting with us, and whatever these emojis mean, send us an email.
Whatever they mean to you, let us know, and thank you also to the sponsors.
Here we are. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank just all the great people that have made this this presentation possible, right? The DynamicsCon, Microsoft for building finance and operations, the Emoji 2 movie, even more emoji. Joel, this was great. We've got a lot of questions from the Q&A. So
I have a question. Did they really make a sequel to that movie?
Well, I mean, here's hoping. We might get a producer credit.
Where'd you get that cool shirt?
Oh, this is at the swag store. I'm sure someone can put a swag store link in the link description. Got to be promoting the merchandise. Everyone should get a shirt. Really comfy. It's a tri-blend. I've never had a tri-blend shirt before, but I don't know what they blended. It's nice.
All right.
So I think a good place to start, right? Someone said, just how do you make these initial connections from Power Apps to finance and operations? All of these things are sort of your tenant is your connection. Is that the right answer, Joel? That as you, how do I link these things as I'm trying to build?
Yeah. So, couple things. Technically speaking, like anywhere in Power Automate, you're going to be able to select which environment you're talking about. So if it's SharePoint, you can select a SharePoint list. If it's F&O, you can select the specific F&O environment that you want to send data into. That's the simple answer. So it's just like a selection criteria at the beginning of creating your Power Automate. But I was mentioning in the chat, and I'll kind of say it out loud, when you deploy a tier 2 environment, so that's UAT in production, you get a Power Apps environment sort of along with it. And that would be the best place for this kind of scenario that we discussed today. Like those two are a little more tightly tied together. And I think over time, Microsoft wants to make them even more tightly tied together. So that's like the logical spot that you'd want to put both of these things from a default perspective.
Okay. Well, that's good. And then I think a second great question that came up, right, was just about performance implications. And right, one, how is this data being passed through, right? Is it OData or DIXF? Sort of what takes place, and how should people think about performance related to building apps like this?
Yeah, so it is, it's OData. I mean, Power Automate specifically. And how should you think about it? I guess see if you can blow it up. I don't know.
You heard it here first, yeah.
Once production stops working, you've done too much. No, I mean, OData is designed for, our scenario was like kind of one record at a time. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to some extent, it is a matter of testing these things, and this isn't designed for millions of records. I'll say that, guaranteed. Like this is designed for a more limited record set. When you get into high volumes, you should be architecting it a different way than using these kind of connectors.
So just as a general caution, your limit is somewhere between 1 and 1 million. but just test to find specifically where that might be. That's good. That's good.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything more about adaptive cards?
They're awesome.
Things that, yeah.
You can use them to send animated GIFs is the most important part of adaptive cards.
Yeah.
I think of them as mini forms, mostly for Teams, because Teams is kind of a logical spot if you want to send somebody a mini form and say, fill this out right now.
Mm-hmm.
Teams is going to give you like a notification, right? Versus email. You can do adaptive cards to an email, but it's not quite the same user experience. So I think adaptive cards plus Teams are a really cool combination. And Microsoft has a site to help you build those adaptive cards. So there's like a specific JSON format that gets built that you can then sort of copy and paste over into Power Automate.
Very cool. So we'll put a link to that site so that people can find it better there in the chat. Okay. Now, one thing right from our demo, and this is something that we tried to gloss over, right? As we, right, the big part of our demo was putting these customer records. And one of the first things that I came to you and I said, how can I build this Power App? And I want to use these. I've got these customer IDs. I want to use customer IDs from the system, right? Dynamics has a number sequence, and I'd like to use the Dynamics number sequence as part of the records that I'm pulling in. And we did a bit of a cheat in our demo, and we just said, oh, we'll just use today's date and time because that's unique. And I know since we recorded that, you said that you might have found a better way. Is it easy to describe, or how would we give someone help in terms of how to pull those unique IDs?
Yeah, I mean, the most common thing that people want to do is to pull the number sequence from F&O.
Mm-hmm.
It's doable, but basically you end up creating custom data entities, which isn't anybody's favorite. So if you're going down the process we described, I'll just say a couple of options. Like you can set up a number sequence in your Power App, which is probably the easiest way to do this. So you can just set up a sequential, customer ID and then send that across to F&O. The key thing is with number sequences, like you can't have them overrunning each other. So you either have to have F&O on a different number sequence as your Power Apps, or set your F&O number sequence to manual and let Power Apps, always send it across. So there's options there, but it's you kind of have to get creative in how you're going to do it.
Yeah, but the Power Apps number sequence is a good hack, I think, to make it work a little bit better, because you could have a standardized number. You're controlling the data that's going into F&O. And then if you were to look in F&O, you'd have a segregation of sorts between your F&O number sequence and your F&O data coming in from Power Apps number sequence. So I just sold it as a benefit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be. The reason I'll just on the F&O side, the reason it's tough is because these OData entities are used for inserts and updates, and so that customer ID ends up becoming the primary key for the entity, and that's why you can't just leave it blank and let F&O do whatever. It just doesn't understand it because it's basically a required field. So. So it's workable, but you definitely something to think through if you currently have things auto numbered in F&O.
Great. And what other resources are out there? Are there any other resources you'd recommend, just in terms of getting started in Power Apps? I think what's been most helpful to me is just trying to find a project that you're interested in and just trying to solve that problem. And reading about Power Apps hasn't been very helpful to me in terms of becoming better at Power Apps, because I need a problem that I want to solve, and that's been my approach.
Yes, I agree. I mean,
Mhm.
trying to find some actual scenario, and just, I mean, there's a couple ways you can play around with it. Like sending stuff to your email and sending stuff to Teams. That's stuff you can just like sort of test on yourself. You don't
Mhm.
you don't have to deploy it to the rest of the company. And on the Power App side, I put it in the chat earlier in the chat. I could paste it again here, but you can have a free development environment. So you won't mess anybody else up. You can build complete Power Apps, forms, views, menus, all the stuff, that you would normally do in a Power App right in that interface. And it's
Mhm.
just specific to you. So the only thing you can't do is like share it with somebody else. If you want to share it, you have to, export it and put it into a different environment.
Mhm.
But I think that's a great way to get started and not worry about, messing up somebody else's practice stuff.
Yeah. Let's see. I think that's all the questions from the QA that I've seen. Anything else that you think the good people here should know before we have to sign off?
Let me see if there was anything else that came in. There was a question about doing this with Excel and reading data to D365, and that's totally possible. Power Automate can connect to Excel. It has to be stored somewhere in the cloud, like in a SharePoint list or a OneDrive folder. But yes, you could start this whole process from Excel file, and you could even say loop through every record in the Excel file and send it over to F&O.
Mhm.
So that's definitely possible. And I think we answered the question.